I'd like to welcome you to our webinar today. Happy Friday to all of you. We're really excited to be here with you today. My name is Abby Ludi. I am the marketing leader for our third-party risk and compliance business, and I will be your moderator today. Just a couple of quick housekeeping items. We are recording this session so that we can send it out to you after the webinar. All participants will be placed on mute. If you would like to ask a question, you can enter it at any time into the Q&A box. We'll have some time for Q&A after the webinar today. We'll also have a few polling questions throughout the webinar, and we invite you to participate in those as well. Again, feel free to enter your questions in at any time in the Q&A box, and we will answer them toward the end of the webinar. So with that, I'd like to introduce you to our speakers today. Paul Westcott is our product director for global customer due diligence products here at Dun Bradstreet, and Chao Zhang is our fraud product leader managing for finance and risk solutions at Dun Bradstreet. So we're really excited to talk to you today about this, this incredibly relevant topic of how to mitigate fraud. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Paul Westcott.
Thank you, Abby. Yeah, thank you very much for taking time out on your busy calendars to support Dun Bradstreet and this webinar. Hopefully, you'll find it informative, and we can provide a little bit of feedback and information for you guys as well. As you can see on the agenda here, there are probably four main areas or four themes that we're going to be looking at today. We'll look at the landscape of increased fraud. We'll look at how balancing that policy and regulatory management from a fraud framework and how to manage some of those elements. We'll look at some steps of the compliance professionals and how we should and what we should focus on to, in the context of fraud. And then we'll start to look at how we can approach business fraud mitigation and support getting better outcomes for your customers. So as we look at the poll, and we've opened up the poll, when Chao and I were collecting our thoughts for this session, it did strike us that the words unprecedented and change have perhaps been the cornerstones of the last 12 to 18 months. With governments pumping money into the economic system, with eye-watering sums, and the realization that business continuity policies and processes and organizations are created, there was a reason nothing seemed truly to prepare us for the changes that the spread of the virus created. So I think this poll is a simple one. Have the changes of COVID-19 forced upon our roles and our organizations really made a difference to you? Whether you're detecting first, second, or third party fraud, is what you do today to detect and track fraud now harder? Is it easier, or in the cold light of day, has the pandemic made no real lasting differences whatsoever? The poll purposely didn't have I do not know, as we're hoping that even if this has not really been truly measured in your organization, perhaps a gut feel will tell you one way or the other how this is particularly working. Now, our assumption here had been that it was going to be mostly harder, and I guess looking at it, it may be due to the lack of resource, due to furloughs, etc., earlier last year, but also the unprecedented demand for checking and detecting as billions of dollars swept through the financial system to support families, businesses, and the wider global economy throughout the pandemic. So I think the poll had highlighted very much so that harder was the main element, and of course we will publish and provide any of the poll details to the audience here today. So without further ado, let's look at the landscape of increased fraud, and I think the results in terms of that harder position and the evidence is mounting that CSPOT personnel are increasingly concerned with the changing fraud landscape, the increasing amount of and the complexity of fraud, and how to manage it efficiently with the right level of resource to maintain profitability within their organization, but ensure that that company and your companies are not susceptible to attack. It is clear that weaknesses in systems were prevalent even before COVID struck. And this slide here highlights that very fact. In 2020, the FCPA had the largest number of settlements in their history, totaling $6.4 billion in costs to organizations throughout the globe. These settlements were driven by many factors, including internal fraud and bribery, but many commentators anticipate that the new Biden administration will actively pursue enforcement of financial crimes and corporate fraud prosecutions and increase regulatory oversight. Financial and economic crises, such as the current conditions caused by COVID-19 pandemic, generally increase fraud and corruption. Given the new administration and the economic backdrop, I think it's safe to expect a continued increase in FCPA enforcement in the coming years. Corruption or lack of procedures and controls to ensure the organization was best placed to drive detection. Now, of course, so far in 2021, not much has actually happened in the world of FCPA enforcements. And I guess in Q1, we have not had any large announcements or headline grabbing news. So with that thoughts in mind, it's clear that those that have to own and manage fraud detection and mitigation in an organization are faced with ever increasing set of challenges. Whether this is an account takeover, the increase in phishing and its sophistication, more open and online banking users due to the pandemic and the confusion that this has caused with many, and in addition, increased security measures that we've all had to get to grips with have led to puzzled consumers and customers, and with an increase of stolen or synthetic IDs. So with this plethora of new challenges, who is taking ownership of this issue? And I guess in this poll, it's interesting to see who is managing fraud within your organization. Does it sit with compliance functions? Is it sitting with credit managers, or are there more dedicated teams now the norm to drive that focus that fraud really needs? I guess our assumption would be here there's probably a mix here, but let me introduce Chow at this point as one of our fraud experts in the D&B fraud team. Chow, what do you think these results are telling us? I'm not sure if Chow can get off mute. I mean, certainly it is a mixed bag.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I'm on now. So while I think this is absolutely very insightful, it's clear to us that from fraud mitigation standpoint, teams may be structured differently across organizations, but well, trust definitely no matter which team they're currently handling fraud at your organization, we're definitely committed to help you solve the problem and make sure our solution can fit into your existing workflow. So back to you, Paul.
Thanks very much. So, of course, thanks for Chow, and of course, that's very insightful in terms of how we've seen that mixed bag of different areas, and I think that goes very much into this next section, which is if there are different teams managing fraud within an organization, there is going to mean that balance of policy and regulatory management and working together. But of course, fraud needs to be set within that context of those policy and regulatory points. It's just one point of a larger set of imperatives. So what is increasingly evident, I think, is that technology is now being used to strike this balance. So let's take a look at some of those technologies a little more. A recent white paper by UK-based Juniper Research suggested that global spending in fintech, redtech sector would rise from an estimated 18 billion in 2018 to 116 billion in 2023. This global phenomenon, but I guess North America at around 42 billion and Western Europe at around 38 billion, were expected to see the bulk of that investment. What is clear is that innovation will include analytics driven by big data, which can produce actionable results far more quickly, including anything from first-party fraud detection, of course, where individuals or groups of people misrepresent their identity or give false information, normally applying for products or services. And of course, they have no real plan to honour the promises that they've made, or right through to possible insider trading activity or terrorist-related transactions. The outcome of more analytics should enable organisations to introduce decisions based on big data analysis throughout more of the steps of the onboarding and monitoring processes of their customers and vendors. On both sides of the Atlantic, the regulatory environment is demanding faster access to increasingly connected data sets. And to manage this influx, data strategists in organisations are being driven to adopt AI tech-based solutions. Fraud policies and processes are increasingly reliant on making decisions that are backed by a plethora of internal and external data points. But as always, bringing this data together and making sense of it exists alongside the challenge of ensuring customers' private information is secure and privacy laws across the globe are adhered to. The COVID pandemic has just highlighted this conflict. But perhaps most importantly for fraud detection with AI and predictive analytics is to complete data analysis extremely quickly, so you can see the complex patterns efficiently with the fast pace of financial services today. It is almost impossible for this to be done by fraud analysts and for them to detect this without this help. AI has started to remove the time-consuming tasks and enables the fraud analysts to then focus on critical cases or critical issues and use their human expertise in the right places. And this ability to focus resource in key areas is something that is true in fraud as much as it's true in general regulatory compliance as well. Therefore, we can see some core technologies that are at the forefront of balancing of this introduction and maintaining the right level of compliance and fraud diligence. Now, as you can see here in this recent poll from Baker McKenzie, it highlights that the current or future spend is concentrated in artificial intelligence and predictive analytics. However, the pandemic may actually have put fraud and compliance professionals into conflict with the rest of the company's more business-focused units. The survey also indicated that while companies are spending on technology to help manage the impact of COVID and beyond, they are often doing so without the input of their compliance or fraud personnel and professionals. So just before we look at AI and predictive analytics in a little more closely, let's take another view from you guys with an audience poll. And I think, as we said, it is really clear that technology is at the forefront of fraud prevention and detection. But where in your organization is this focus? Is AI critical? Are you focusing on tools and engines that support business rules? Or is predictive analytics key? Or again, is it a mixture of all of the above that is driving out fraud detection and fraud mitigation in your particular organizations? Now, if I may, on this poll, I'd like to just invite Chao back from her expert analysis here. Chao, when you've been seen and heard from people in the fraud and the customers that you talk to, what's the mix been from your point of view?
Yeah, we're definitely seeing all of the above, and this is really very close to what we're seeing here as well. In today's world, it's really critical to leverage all the tools, and traditionally, a lot of the companies have been using rules engine automated business rules to detect fraud, and recently it's also, there is a shift more leveraging AI, machine learning, predictive analytics, and likely, to really have the most robust solution, we would need to use all of those solutions, to deliver the best result in terms of fraud capture. So this is very helpful.
Thanks, Chao. Yeah, as Chow was highlighting there, I think I myself and many commentators believe that the use of AI in fraud detection is really the driving force at the moment, and in some respects it stems from a very simple idea, with the obvious objectives and conclusions. How do you detect more, be able to scale as problems increase and get more complex, whilst doing this with fewer resources, and ultimately with a better return on investment? Now, according to Google Trends that I looked at today, fraud detection using AI and machine learning has risen significantly in 2020 and continues to do so in 2021. AI and machine learning models are able to learn from patterns of normal behavior. They are very fast to adapt to the changes, like the changes we'd seen in COVID-19, and see the changes in those normal behavioral patterns, and isolate where, and very quickly, where those changes occur. Algorithms that learn from historical fraud patterns and recognize them in future transactions are going to be key moving forward. They appear more effective than humans when it comes to the speed of the information processing. Moreover, they can find sophisticated fraud traits that often people cannot. And as we said before, this then allows organizations to work faster at scale. Better performance, along with growth of the data sets which need to be assessed, means better ways to be able to recognize fraud and stop it in its tracks. And of course, with scale and speed comes that efficiency play. Whether it's AI or machine learning, AI can support the more routine tasks, and particularly the repetitive aspects of manual fraud analysis, allowing specialists to spend quality time on making more high-level decisions that could actually increase the return on investment on the for organizations, because they are dealing with the ones that matter, and letting predictive analytics and AI manage the general mundane tasks that are delivered within this area and with these ecosystems. But of course, AI is not the only game in town, and with predictive analytics, it's also clear that this is a very clear fraud trend. In reality, the primary advantage, I guess, of data analytics in fraud is that it can handle massive quantities of information at once. These solutions understand what is normal within a collection of information and how to spot those anomalies. Fraud analytics needs that historical evidence en masse and masses of data to determine if and how fraud occurs, who was involved, and when it occurred. And clearly, organizations with high levels of big data and high levels of historic data are going to be able to support and succeed when it comes to working with fraud analytics and predictive analytics models. And of course, with predictive analytics systems can take selected sets of variables known to be involved in past fraud events and place those variables into processes to determine the likelihood that future outcomes or events will or wouldn't be potential fraud. Now, working for DNB, I am, of course, going to say incomplete or accurate data can create havoc, and we've seen that many a time. So there is obviously a balance between the predictive analytics, but of course how it is dependent upon the quality of the data, because without it, one of the greatest benefits, the quick actionable-based results, could be inaccurate, leading to lost time and ultimately more effort than was actually required. So we have discussed how there have been a prevalence of fraud. We've looked at some of the core aspects in terms of AI and predictive analytics, but maybe we can just turn to how some of this has manifested itself over this COVID pandemic. Now, according to a recent survey and by PwC review, a number of key risks that have been heightened due to the global pandemic. Now, I haven't got time to go into all of them today, but I wanted to highlight a few that I thought were at the forefront of fraud as well as digital transformation, and highlight some of the ways that PwC felt these could be managed and help mitigate fraud alongside. Firstly, one we're now all familiar with is the emergence of the virtual workspace. Organizations weren't given a lot of time to adapt to the digital workplace. And besides the technological aspects of working remotely, it also brings challenges in people management, supervision, work balances, coaching of employees, and just generally being able to support yourselves from a peer-to-peer analysis group. So, of course, some of the areas that they're considering is how do you support employees with this change and this new way of working, and ensuring that they're up to date with the latest information. And with that, you will need clear communication from all levels of management about the company's expectation from their employees, and how what they can do can help on mitigating of fraud. And of course, as we've all had to do, companies are exploring new and more efficient ways of working through online collaboration tools. Secondly, and perhaps one of the lesser highlighted effects is that of the culture, both within organizations and across the system. Due to the changing work environment, it's become more difficult to control compliant behavior. So soft controls have become more important than ever before, like to ensure the risk and compliance measures adjust to new ways of working, and making sure that it's clear for people what is expected from them and how they can reach out and discuss in cases of uncertainty. Thirdly, there has been a lot of airtime given to cyber. Cybercrime increases and cybersecurity becomes more important when virtual and remote working becomes the new standard. Furthermore, the rise of online activity can result in an increased risk of data leaks. Increased numbers of users utilizing BYOD, or bring your own device, could increase the information security vulnerabilities and your likelihood for fraud. And finally, another critical risk that has been increased due to COVID-19 pandemic is that of reputational risk. Due to cancelled contracts, cancelled projects, the pressure to deliver sales and manage your whole ecosystem, as well as bad communication, has all had an effect due to the crisis. And of course, this can have a loss of confidence, and it's important to have adaptive strategies and have a clear plan to protect brand integrity and to protect your brand from fraud. So before I bring Chow in to highlight some of the core ways we should approach business fraud mitigation, let me comment on some of the steps as professionals in this industry we perhaps could focus on. And of course, as PwC's Global Economic Crime Survey in 2020 highlighted, 47% of the companies experienced fraud in the last 24 months. So this has never been more important. Now, so what sort of areas and needs to be considered? What controls and measures should we be looking at? I guess there's some elements here, and as you can read through on this slide, but there's clearly a urgent and need to update the fraud landscape or fraud risk landscape, reassess the existing controls in place. Are they taking into account all of the different aspects that could be part of the ecosystem for your particular organization? And then from there, adjust the controls where needed to the new reality, the new way we're working, and the new way that we're dealing with our customers. It is very clear that the exploitation of the potential of artificial intelligence to automate some of these controls would allow us to work in this pressurized environment with potentially a reduction in costs and a reduction of our teams, but still maintain those efficiencies and maintain the high levels and standards that organizations strive for. And of course, we need to stress the importance of compliance and improve fraud risk awareness throughout our organisations, so that it's not us dealing with this, or your teams dealing with this. This is something that as an organisation as a whole, there is an army behind making sure that our organisations are as bulletproof as they can be to fraud exploitation. So we can see that technology is being adopted, but we also need to look at the data aspect to this. And why is data important when we're looking at this technology-driven change? Well, firstly, I think it is important to ensure that we gain deeper understanding of our customers and our vendors. If we're segmenting customer bases and understanding their value, no matter what industry you work in, you will need to want to ensure you stay relevant to your customers and reach the right people with the right messages. With an accurate and complete and holistic view of your customers, organizations can gain a clearer picture of their target audience, deliver more relevant information and services, and introduce new approaches to ensure that help gets to them where they most need it. But truly understanding your actual customers can then help you spot those fraudulent ones. Secondly, to enable the data-delivered decisions from an AI or a machine learning or predictive analytics, it is a fact that your customers will remember you and how you respond to the pandemic long after we return to a normal daily life. Poor data is entangling and crippling entire organizations, and timely decision-making is hindered, and the customer experience can be negatively affected. More organizations than ever seek quick wins to improve data quality, and data can help with fraud mitigation and detection. And this is now more the rule rather than the exception. And this data must be of high quality, and that is what is driving digital transformation. So another side effect of COVID is that many organizations are trying to accelerate this digital transformation. This momentous journey can be more problematic if controls are not put in place to ensure the highest standard of data accuracy, appropriate formatting, and reliability in the first place, to make sure that your AI, your machine learning models, and the predictive analytics in your fraud space can work for you. Researchers recently revealed that 87% of organizations believe data quality is fundamental or significant to their digital transformation success. Yet today, only 45% have made data quality tools a focus of investment. And getting this right from a fraud lens is clearly an imperative. And finally, we probably need to break silos. Data quality matters. But what you do with the data is equally important. To accelerate ourselves out of the crisis and have those businesses come to the place they were before, we need to break down the data silos, drive innovation, and put in place strategies and solutions that deliver better, more actionable results through data collected together rather than apart. Organizations that succeed are those that can make sense of the data that they have across their organizations, and spotting those opportunities and understanding the anomalies. And getting this right will only maximize companies' chances of success in fraud mitigation and detection. And of course, fraud is often the most virulent during downturns and crises like we've seen today, like we've seen over the last 12 months. When pressures on people, companies, and the economy are greatest, there are pressures to motivate fraudsters. Disturbances in normal business processes, controls, and working conditions give malicious people and actors opportunities to commit fraud, while the chaos and the uncertainty that we've had over this period of time often rationalizes bad behavior that might otherwise have been checked by ethical codes. So as leaders focus on stabilizing their businesses, they should consider how fraud might penetrate their ecosystems and ensure they have strategies on how to prepare for the disruption that may bring, so they emerge stronger on the other side. And on that note, I'd like to introduce Chow on that very topic about fraud mitigation.
Thank you, Paul. So we all just heard how important the role of machine learning data and predictive analytics can play in fraud mitigation, right? So I would like to share a couple more thoughts on how we're approaching fraud here at Dun Bradstreet and what part of fraud problems we specialize in. So we're mainly focusing on business-to-business fraud mitigation. Why business? We have heard from clients over and over again how business fraud can be highly sophisticated. It requires a different set of data and tools for risk mitigation. And we also understand that there are a couple of goals on your end. You're looking for a way to reduce customer friction and really try to stay away from a lengthy and manual process for fraud mitigation. So as Paul mentioned earlier, right, especially post-COVID, now that more and more our daily lives are moving online, what type of frauds we're looking at here across our customer base. So as we can see here on this page, at a high level, we can mainly categorize them into first-party fraud versus third-party fraud. Here are some typical behaviors of first-party fraud. A fraudster opens an account with no intention to pay, first payment default. They either open the account with real or synthetic identity. And in many of these cases, it will be very difficult to recognize this type of fraud, and ultimately it becomes a collections case. Another typical behavior, a fraudster misrepresents business information to get a higher credit limit or make false claims. And third-party fraud on the right-hand side is very different. Someone else is committing fraud representing the business, and the business becomes a victim in that case. And this type of fraud often involves a fraudster stealing another business identity, or in some case, compromising another account. So if we could move to the next page, we understand how overwhelming to really think about all these different fraud types. How do we tackle them, as many of these as possible? And that's why we are leveraging a common fraud detection framework here at DNB. At the core of any business fraud type, it really comes down to first knowing which business this is. What do we know about it? What red flags are out there based on the business data? And this ties to the core of what we do here at DNB, right? Many of you may have already been very familiar with our Dun's identity resolution solution. We have over 360 million business entities in our data cloud. And we're leveraging a wide range of global data sources, which include tens of thousands of trade, registry, and business website data. And we cover large and small public and private companies. And it's also knowing who's behind the business or transaction. Is it even a real individual, or maybe this is a synthetic identity with partial real and partial fake identity elements? What do we know about the person in the overall context of business fraud detection? And how do we know the person is even who they say they are? And last but not the least, how do we tie the two together and making sure the individual can indeed represent the business? So next, we can take a look at, from a data source standpoint, what are we talking about if we go to the next page? This shows you the comprehensive data assets we are leveraging here for fraud detection. So we start from firmographic data to first establish the business identity. Once we identify which business this is, we also find data such as incorporation date, revenue. What about any major open public events, such as bankruptcies or financial embarrassments? We capture digital identity data. This is very important, especially in today's online world. We will be looking at emails, device, IP, and phone risk as part of this overall risk assessment. And last but not least, we look at the transaction history. We look at their operating, their financial status. Is there any recent increase? And we also look into if we can find any fraud alerts from DNB's proprietary fraud consortium. We call it ERCR. And as some of you may already know, ERCR is it's also called Extreme Risk Consortium Repository. Since 2005, we have already developed over 300K fraud alerts from a team of certified fraud examiners here at DNB. And we will be able to verify whether a business has already been reported to us for fraud. And if so, any kind of suspicious business characteristics we can find, right? So next, if we take a look at, with all those data sources, what solution we have in mind. So here you can see here, we are introducing a single API to integrate with your online system to deliver a combination of business fraud analytics and aggregated fraud signals. Why API first? We want to make sure this is a solution flexible enough to fit into your existing online process and fraud operations workflow. Let's say if your company already has an online application or onboarding system, our API will be integrated with the system. And through this API, we collect your applicants' self-reported business data and capture digital identity data such as email, device, and IP. We then append with the wide range of data assets we shared earlier and aggregate all these data points to process through our machine learning and rule processing algorithms. At the end of this process, you will be able to see in your own fraud operations workflow our machine learning fraud analytics, which are covering major first-party and third-party fraud types, and very importantly, all the red flags and fraud signals you will be able to leverage for your fraud investigation. So what are red flags? If we go to the next page, we have a few examples. And here, this is an example in terms of how we look at red flags. The first set is based on firmographic data. If you look at the graph here on the left, this is a low-risk profile. The applicant's self-reported data is an exact match to DNB's reference data. On the right-hand side, though, it's very clear this is a high-risk profile. Likely, we're not just seeing one discrepancy. We will be seeing multiple data discrepancies in terms of what they tell us and what we know, right? So here we see discrepancies in terms of address or incorporation year or annual sales. These are all the red flags we have developed. If we go to the next page, we can also see another set of red flags we have developed. And this is based on transaction history, right? If you look at the graph here on the left, here we look at, do we see any sudden recent increase? And a high risk profile is showing 3x increase versus a low risk profile. Here on the right, like I mentioned earlier, we're also looking into DNB's proprietary fraud consortium result. We will be able to know if this case has already been reported for fraud, and maybe this address has already been used for fraud previously, and we're seeing that evidence from our own consortium. And we will be able to tell you if this case has already been investigated by our fraud examiners, and if so, what type of fraud this is. So it's very clear that we have all those data, and Paul also mentioned earlier how important machine learning and fraud analytics are, right? And all of those data and insights we have developed here at DNB will be going into our machine learning fraud models. And here we have a case in point from a recent customer case we have seen. And this client recently experienced over 100K fraud loss due to this one case. So we went on to see what we would have been able to discover at or around the loan origination date. And the result is compelling. As you can see here, from one of our machine learning model, business misrepresentation, we're seeing a fraud probability of 0.73, which is high risk. We're seeing data discrepancy in terms of the year of incorporation. We are also seeing the email used for loan application was established only 2 days before the loan origination day. Wow, such a big red flag. And then last but not least, this case and this business has already been reported to DNB's fraud consortium and investigated as of December 2020, right? So very compelling. And if we go to the next page, so we hope that all of this information can really give you a high-level overview of the business fraud detection solution we have here. I want to close out this presentation to say that here at DNB, our mission is really to help you capture fraud as early as possible and also as seamless as possible. We very much understand how fighting fraud is a very tough and ongoing process. So we have taken on the detailed and complex work of data sourcing, cleansing, verification to create the most robust fraud data dictionary. Our supervised machine learning models are drawing on deep insights we have developed over time from DNB's certified fraud examiners and our analytics team. Our Dun's identity resolution is a proven methodology to establish business identity. And with a common fraud solution framework, our goal is to capture as many major fraud types as possible across multiple industries. And our mission here is to help you improve your overall fraud capture rate with a combination of fraud analytics and reflex. We totally understand how critical it is to aggregate all the fraud insights to make your fraud mitigation job easier, right? So with that, thank you so much again for the opportunity of speaking with you. Paul and I are very happy to take any questions you may have. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Chao and Paul. Again, a reminder that if you'd like to ask a question, please enter it into the Q&A box. It looks like we did have some questions come in during the presentation. Our first question is, can you explain a little bit more why it's so important to have fraud analytics as well as red flags in one solution?
Yeah, happy to take that. Thanks, Abby. So yeah, the reason why it's really critical to have both the fraud scores as well as the red flags is because we have heard so much from customers like you that sometimes just having a fraud score is like a black box. I want to know why. I want to know all the insights you can provide to me so I understand better what's behind your score and what can you help me make the final decision about this case. And that's why we have spent a lot of time here at DNB to not only focus on developing the most advanced machine learning fraud analytics we can deliver to you, also to very strong fraud insights we can deliver as a package.
Perfect.
So
thank you so much. Looks like we had another question come in. What should organizations do with multiple systems and data sources to help manage fraud prevention?
I'm happy to take that as well, Abby. So we know that companies may have very different systems or aggregated sources, right? So I think that's why we are delivering this API solution, and our goal is to really offer it as a flexible solution. So you can think about how you can actually use this one API to aggregate all those disparate data sources. And also it's very important to think about where is the place, what might be the best place to integrate with this API. Our recommendation is to actually try to capture fraud as early as possible. So, right, as early as during the application process, or ideally you can capture fraud real time right there, right then, before the fraudster comes into your customer database, right? So that would be our recommendation. So think about using this one API to aggregate all your data sources, and what's the right place to integrate with the API.
Yeah, Chao, I agree with you 100%. I think one of the critical challenges of that silo mentality and that data is that it was created in a database to do a specific function or a specific role at a specific time, and there's nothing that connects it. Of course, one of the areas that is traditionally been a strength for Dun Bradstreet is by using that DUNS number and using that across areas. You can start to connect the dots between businesses within those silos, and use that unique identifier, which is the cradle to grave and beyond DUNS number, to ensure that you've got the same business entity across your ecosystem. But I think moreover on that, if we look at this more from a less of a business lens, I mean, it is people that commit fraudulent activity more often than not, and there's obviously a need to try and connect the dots between both the organizations and the people behind those organizations. And one of the areas that Dun & Bradstreet is looking at is that network analysis and that network intelligence around the people behind businesses, and using entity resolution software to be able to bring together the same person who might be working in multiple companies, who has multiple liens against those companies, that may be a highly predictive model in terms of whether they are fraudulent in terms of their starting of companies and finishing those companies.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Related to the API that you were just speaking of, can you talk about some of the systems that the data can be brought into with the API?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the way we have designed this API, it's really flexible enough to be integrated with any of your systems. So we don't really have a very specific requirements, and we're happy to talk to you and your tech team to see how can we help you and making sure that this is the API that will fit into your that can be integrated and fit into your existing workflow and system. So but overall this should be a solution that's flexible enough to really fit in.
Yeah, and in general, from a D+, which is our suite of APIs, each of the various component parts, whether it's entity resolution and match, whether it's about fraud detection or score information, each of these are atomic APIs that allow you to do that single function, but they all have the same nomenclature and work together. So whether you're building this into a proprietary system, or whether you've purchased information from or purchased software from regtech or fintech firms that you're working with in this space, what we found is that Dun & Bradstreet APIs are easy to integrate, and simple for developers to be able to scale, and they're fast. We have a very clear intent to deliver the data back in speeds that allow you to be able to do that daily business and those daily transactions that are required at this time, with the influx of requests and the build up and scale that your organizations are leaning towards.
Great, thank you. Looks like we have one more question. For smaller companies, are you able to gather fraud analytics about smaller organizations that may not have a DUNS number?
Yeah, that's great. Well, first of all, I just want to reiterate this. Our DUNS identity solution actually includes over 360 million business entities in our data cloud. So that covers not just large companies. We also cover a big portion, also small companies as well. And on top of that, our fraud solution can also provide insights, even when in certain cases we may not be able to find a best match DUNS number. We will be able to do fraud check just based on the business element. For example, we look at the email that's being used for transaction, or we use the device, and we then also look at, can we find any closest, match just based on the business input elements, even if we don't find the best match DUNS number. So we are making, our best efforts to provide you all the fraud insights we could develop, we could provide to you, just based on our wide range of data assets, with or without a DUNS number.
Chow, I think that's a really
this answers your question.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, that last one, because it is fair to say that the Duns and Dun Bradstreet's Duns can really bring data together and support that, but we're very mindful that the gig economy is changing the way that people do business and businesses are created. And to Charles' point there, our fraud analytics and our fraud solutions are not tied to the Duns. They can spot these things using other data points. So we're not reliant on it. We can support you with or without it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It looks like those were all of the questions that came in today. Thank you again, everyone, for joining our webinar today. We really are thankful that you were able to make it. Within the next couple of days, you should see an email that will contain a link to the presentation materials that you saw today, as well as a recording. So stay tuned for that email. Again, thank you so much for coming today, and we hope you have a wonderful weekend.